I have been watching the Stone case with a lot more interest since the case concluded than I did while he was being convicted. The crimes for which he was convicted were relatively straightforward. He was charged with 7 felonies. The jury unanimously found him guilty on all 7 counts. Since then, it has emerged into a different thing of national significance. How important is it that the president is attacking members of the jury?
So you already had something remarkable in this case, which is you had the entire trial team withdraw or resign from the Department of Justice. So that's already, that does not happen. Mm-hmm. And now you have a second thing, which the judge correctly commented on, was she just couldn't believe it was happening. And she actually closed the courtroom because of it, which was the president attacking the jury. So all of us have been on juries. I've been on a jury, remarkably. And actually, even after the special counsel's office, I was on a jury.
Wow.
But Americans do that. It's part of our duty, the way that you do military service. It's something you do. And the idea that the president of the United States would attack the jurors is really remarkable. And that led to Judge Jackson closing the courtroom, so there was audio feed, but you actually wouldn't see the jurors who testified because she was concerned about the sort of ongoing attacks.
She went so far to exclude the courtroom sketch artists so that they couldn't even create a likeness of what the jurors looked like.
Absolutely, and only one lawyer from each side could be present when a marshal testified about threats that were being made to the jurors.
So if you could just talk sort of as an experienced prosecutor here about what the implications of that are. Because on the one hand, we see this just at a human level. Any of us could be jurors. These people didn't volunteer for it. They shouldn't be attacked like this. But it has a big effect on the administration of justice if individual jurors have to fear for their safety, fear for their careers, fear being singled out like this, including by the president, depending on how they vote as jurors and how they deliberate.
Well, this happens in mob cases where you actually have anonymous and protected, sequestered juries because you're so concerned about the defendant getting to the jurors. And nobody should have to worry about that. I think it's important here, though, to talk about the law here as in terms of just how much that the president got wrong here. In order for the foreperson to be, quote, biased and should have been removed, the law doesn't require that people don't have views before they start serving on a jury. All of us do. The law doesn't require that everyone who serves on a jury was found under a rock and they come in like newborn babes, just, hearing everything for the first time. What the law requires is that you can put that aside and hear the case based on the principles that the judge sets forth and the facts that are elicited. And a good example of that is when Paul Manafort was tried, the one juror who spoke after he was convicted was someone who said, I am a Trump supporter. I left my MAGA hat in my car and I showed up for jury duty. And you know what? It wasn't a problem because I swore an oath to follow what the judge said to do, and I did it. And, I'd be interested to hear whether the president thinks that kind of juror shouldn't be able to sit. And the issue is we all act on principle. And I think that's something that the law recognizes. And clearly what we've heard from the foreperson and from the other juror who wrote in the Washington Post is that the jury did that. So I suspect that we're going to hear from Judge Jackson that there was no impropriety here.